Uh, I think we all know that the first actual Scout camp was held a year later in Northumberland. Wrong again. And the answer is, well, all will be revealed presently by Colin. I think most of us here know or think we know something of the early history of Scouting. And the fact we're here means we're interested in learning something more, I think. I remember a while ago saying that every time I heard Colin speak, I learnt something new about Scouting. Actually, I think that's doing Colin a bit of a disservice, because I always learn a lot that's new to me, certainly. And I'm sure the same is true for you too. His scholarship and his meticulous research is well known. But this evening, expect to be surprised. Now, why do I say surprised? Well, most of the photographs you see this evening were taken in 1908, including some magic lantern slides, amazingly. And some of these have never been published before. You'll see, for example, a photo of the founder at the Humpshof camp, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope, taken by one of the Gallant 30 on a camera that the participants were given by BP. This information and these photographs have been triangulated across many unknown sources, including 4 Humpshof camp diaries. Those became separated across 2 continents. They've never been read by anybody else apart from probably BP, and they have been read by Colin. So nobody else has seen these before, and Colin is going to tell us all about it. With his long-standing website, he's got direct contact with the descendants of some of the boys and the key players whose generosity in providing information for this evening, and in some cases actual artifacts, means this is a really, truly unique presentation. So no more spoilers. You really want to hear about this from Colin, not from me. Colin Walker.
Well, thank you very much, John. And the slide that you're seeing on the screen is the book, The Dawn of the World Scout Movement. Our last Zoom talk was Brownsea, which is 1907 event, and The Dawn covers all the happenings of 1908. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cover all the happenings of 1908 in our 1 hour-ish talk, but we're going to concentrate on the fundamentals that matter to the development of Scouting. So, welcome everybody. And just before the end of 2007, our founder, Baden Powell, wrote not a very well-known little pamphlet of a book, which we're going to see on the screen now, and it's called The Scouting Scheme. I think it's got about 16 pages in it, and it got 2 purposes. One was to canvass support from the great and the good, and when they returned their comments to Baden Powell, he could then very cleverly include them in the pages of Scouting for Boys. So if you've ever been lucky enough to see a first edition, and then in the first edition, you've read reviews of Scouting, you thought, well, how could that happen? If this is the first Scout book, in it, there are reviews by people. Well, that's because what they were reviewing was the Scouting Scheme written by Baden Powell. It's a very nice little publication, very hard to find. Very fortunate to have this one. I think there are about 17 mentions to peace scouting, which would lead people under no illusion what Baden Powell thought it was about. Talks about peace scouting a lot. I'm just going to read you a little bit from it, because it has a nice link from Brownsea. He's talking about Brownsea when he says, since this experimental camp, I'm more than ever convinced of the possibility which underlie the Scouts training as an educator for boys of all classes. Prepared as I was for enthusiastic endeavour on the part of the lads, I was surprised at the affection of their character, which became visible even in the few days that we had to work. So that's the link then that Baden Powell is placing directly on the success of the Brownsea camp and what he learned from that, carried on through the Boy Scout scheme, that then went directly into his work that we heard about with his link to Pearson, the publisher, who he was in a contract with. You remember that Pearson gave him a sum of money equating to well over £3,000 in today's money, and he set about doing lecture tours, and he was persuaded by Pearson that he must be the head of this new movement. Baden-Powell thought that he perhaps could run it by remaining in the army and letting agencies such as the Boys Brigade and the Church Lads Brigade and the YMCA run scouting as outlined by Baden-Powell. But Pearson said, no, I'm contracted with you. You have to be the head of this organization. So Baden-Powell set off writing for Scouting for Boys, and we know what he did. He'd got an old ammunition tin from Brownsea, and in it he'd written notes that he thought would be good to help in young men's life change from boyhood to manhood and becoming better citizens. And he got examples from the Knights of the Bushido and from Zulu tribes all over the world into the ammunition box. And now he'd got to bring them out and start formulating this great work, Scouting for Boys. But I suspect, like most of us, he'd also got other hobbies. And one of his great hobbies at the time was fishing. So we know, for instance, that he went to Sir Isaac Walton Hotel in Dovedale, where he was meant to be writing Scouting for Boys. But what did he do? He fished. And so he went to Middleton in Teesdale, where he was meant to be writing Scouting for Boys. And what did he do? He fished. So he was getting a bit behind on the deadline. And after a bit of a stern talking with Mr. Keary, who was Mr. Pearson's literary editor, he negotiated the loan from a rich lady. And Baden-Powell, believe me, was very good at negotiating funds from rich ladies. This particular rich lady, her name was Mrs. Fanshawe. Nothing unusual, you might say, in that, but Mrs. Fanshawe was one of the English upper crust. And so she might be called Mrs. Fanshawe, but her name was spelt Featherstone Hoff, but pronounced Fanshawe. So Mrs. Fanshawe let Baden-Powell have the use of her cottage next door and part of the windmill at Wimbledon. And here it is in the snow. So Baden-Powell then was ensconced in that windmill, and he called this period Purdah because he was under strict orders to talk to nobody but Keary, who was the literary editor, and to get on with the job of writing Scouting for Boys. Now, we know that he actually did have time out because he talks later on in this talk. We'll talk about some of the people that he met on Wimbledon Common. But he got down to the job and he was busy writing the manuscript of Baden-Powell, which we're very fortunate enough to have in Scout Archives. And now we're going to have a look at the plaque on Wimbledon Windmill, which is going to confirm to us that Baden-Powell, Chief Scout of the World, wrote Scouting for Boys in the year 1908. Well, he maybe wrote most of Scouting for Boys in that cottage, but he should have been writing it in the other places as well. So I think the George Hotel at Cholerford, which we're going to be talking about later, he did write part there. He did write part, little bits of it at the other places he was fishing. So we go now to the manuscript. Very exciting. It's in the Scout Archives. I've held it in my hands. I took these photographs. Here we go. Now, Ken, you're going to love that. That's Baden-Powell Sketches of the Tenderfoot Knots. Wasn't it good? Yep. Lovely. Yeah, and so we move on now to the Scout Law. Now this, if you've heard me talk before, you will know this is my favorite Scout Law of all time, as written by Baden-Powell. Close to the one that I actually took when I took my Law and Promise back in 1956, but different. A scout is a friend to all and a brother to other scouts, no matter what social class the other may belong. That's the 1908 Fourth Scout Law. Baden-Powell modified that to add other catch-me's. And the other catch-me's, of course, were no matter what country, class, or creed the other may belong. If we could only stick to those three things, today, the world would be a much better place. So this is, that law I've just told you is my 4th Scout law, and that is the law I try to live to, not the one today that says, very good words, a Scout is a friend to all, but I regret that it doesn't quite cut the grass as much as this one does with the later editions that Baden-Powell made. So then we move on to the justification for the Scout motto. The meaning of the motto is that the Scout must prepare himself by previous thinking out and practicing how to act in any accident or emergency, so that he's never taken by surprise. He knows exactly what to do when anything happens. And of course, he's writing about be prepared. Baden-Powell loved coincidences. BP, Baden-Powell, boss of the planes hat. Now, I found out something this week. John was talking about learning something. I learned something this week, just 2 days ago, from a correspondent of mine in South America, who sent me some newspaper cuttings from a 1902, 2 different 1902s. So that's good, because one's confirming the other, that said Baden-Powell developed the motto, be prepared, for the South African Constabulary in 1902. So we've got the army to thank for our Scout hat, for our Scout shirt, for our motto, for our patron saint, St. George, who was the patron saint of cavalry. So those are things he brought across from the army, including the motto. And now we move on to the next piece of manuscript. And here, this is in red. This is part 6. Baden-Powell used a very clever organizational code so that he could write bits of different chapters at different times, but he'd know how to put them all together because they were all the same color. So this is chapter 6. Notes to the instruction, how to teach observation in practice. Now, we're talking about the fortnightly parts for Scouting for Boys that came out, I think it was the 16th of January, 1908, every fortnight, 6 different parts. And Baden-Powell had a bit of a confrontation with his sponsor, Pearson, who of course was a great publishing man, and always with his eye to the main chance. If you were logically going to start a movement for Scouts, for boys, what would your first approach be, I wonder? Baden-Powell thought his first approach should be to write a manual for would-be Scout leaders, Scoutmasters, of course, as they were called at the time. Because if you've got a Scoutmaster, you've got a nucleus for the boys to come to, who will be able to give them the information, and the show would be on the road. Pearson didn't think like that. Pearson thought that the best thing to do was to get the boys on the hook. So Baden-Powell and Pearson had another great negotiation, because Baden-Powell wanted as many people as possible to read these books. And so he thought that the fortnightly parts should cost a penny. Publisher Pearson thought they should cost a lot more money than that. So he wanted to cost 1 6 each. So they compromised on 4p. So Pearson had his way, however, in that parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 were addressed to the boy without scarcely a mention of an adult. So the boys who read these parts, they went away and started to put into practice what they were reading in Scouting for Boys and forming patrols. And so the first Boy Scout patrols were formed without any reference to men. And time after time, up and down the country, we read about the formation of early Scout troops where patrols of boys went along to the vicar, or they went along to the lord of the manor, and they asked for a place to meet, and they asked, would this person be their Scoutmaster? But first 5 parts of Scouting for Boys is encouraging boys to become Scouts without adult guidance, because it was only in part 6, those bits of the manuscript that was written in hand, by hand, that adults were given enough information as to how they should go about becoming a Scoutmaster and actually what that meant. So the show is on the road, 6 fortnightly parts, paperback, you see part 5 there. All the sketches on the front covers are all different, and they're not by Baden-Powell. So he chose a friend of his from the London Sketch Club to do these sketches. I don't know why he didn't do them himself, because his sketches are perfect, if not better than those. So after the parts had all come out, we had to wait until March for the first hardbound edition. Now, there were all sorts of influences on Baden-Powell on what he was, not only his own experiences. He was a very sensible man. We talked about Baden-Powell, the educator, when we were talking about his work on Brownsea. Well, he was not a person to undertake any project without finding everything there was to find out about it, and to involve himself in as much expertise as there was available from other people. And it just happened that there was at that time somebody who had already founded a movement based on outdoors for young people. And this was a man who was called Ernest Thompson. Well, he was called Ernest Thompson when he lived in County Durham. But he was his antecedents were Scottish. He lived in County Durham, by coincidence, quite close to a place called Seaton Delaval. But that was nothing to do with his ancestry in Scotland, where part of his family were called Seaton. So later on, when he emigrated from County Durham to Canada, where he became a naturalist employed by the Canadian government, he changed his name to Ernest Thompson Seaton, and he became a great naturalist, and he wrote lots and lots of books. And he heard about a problem that they're having in the deep south of America in New Mexico, which interested him. And that was, there was a rogue king wolf, it was described as a rogue king wolf, who was killing the farmers' stocks. They'd employed people to try and kill this animal and get rid of it because it was causing mayhem, and the animal evaded the hunters every single time. So now there was a bounty on the head of this animal, and this intrigued Seaton. And there is a picture by Seaton himself of the king wolf. So Seaton, like Baden-Powell, was a great artist. Like Baden-Powell, he was a writer of books. So Seaton hot-footed it down to New Mexico, and he devised a way of coming to terms with the king wolf. And what he did was very, very clever. He snared the king wolf's mate. So she was penned, and then, of course, the king wolf came to find his mate, and that was the end of the king wolf. But an amazing thing happened, said Seaton. At the time the king wolf was killed, its spirit entered Seaton's soul, and Seaton called the wolf Lobo. And from then on, whenever he signed himself with Lobo's footprint, pad print. So there you are. This is quite an early signature, look, in 1910. So you haven't got his signature, but you've got Lobo's paw print as well. But later on in his life, you just often got the paw print. So this was a person who set up Seaton's Red Indian tribes, because Seaton was a person who appreciated native people's culture, and he was horrified by the way the Canadian and American governments were treating the Plains Indians of North America. And so his Red Indian tribes tried to take on the culture of the Indians and learn their woodcraft skills. So Seaton was a major exponent in woodcraft. He was running this outdoor movement, which he called his tribes, across America. And there were 6 Seaton tribes in England, 2 in Lancashire, the rest in the south of England. And so somebody famous put Seaton in contact with Baden-Powell, and the 2 men corresponded and they shared ideas. And we learned that when Baden-Powell went to Brownsea, most of the games the boys played at Brownsea, they were Seaton's games. And in Scouting for Boys, there are a lot of references to Seaton and inspiration taken from Seaton. So here we're going to see a book. Now, Seaton himself was quite a person who some people found very difficult to get on with. Baden-Powell had borrowed a lot of his ideas. We heard about the metal prints for tracking that Baden-Powell used at Brownsea that were Seaton's. And later on in life, Seaton unfortunately turned on Baden-Powell and some of the other people that he knew. He fell out with the Boy Scouts of America. He became the chief scout, and the Boy Scouts of America and Seaton parted company. Seaton would not subscribe to taking the oath of allegiance to the flag of America because he was Canadian, which you might say was fair enough, but he was an atheist, so he wouldn't have anything to do with God in a promise. And so the American Boy Scouts and Seaton parted company, but he fell out with Baden-Powell, and he said categorically that Baden-Powell has stolen scouting from him, and wrote to Baden-Powell along these terms. Why hadn't Baden-Powell in his book, Scouting for Boys, acknowledged the input that Seaton had had? So Baden-Powell replied to him, and he said, well, there are 17 references to you and one to your wife in Scouting for Boys. Have you not read it? So Seaton replied, no, I haven't read Scouting for Boys, even though he was sent a complimentary copy. So his complaints did have some foundation, because when he did come to England, he found that the scout shop was selling his tracking iron designs without any reference to his name. But this book is astounding. It belongs to a friend of mine who's a historian in America called Dave Scott. He was looking for some books on Seaton, went into an ordinary bookshop, and he found this Seaton book, Two Little Animals, one of the famous early Seaton's book. And it was the same price as any other Seaton book. And he opened the book and it reads, C. Curtis. Well, I can tell you that's Cedric Curtis, who was one of the Brownsea boys from RSS Baden-Powell, Scouts Camp, Brownsea Island, 8th of August, 1907. So that's a nice little artifact to have in your armory if you're confronted with people who are going to say, well, Baden-Powell used Seaton and never acknowledged his work, because here's Baden-Powell on Brownsea giving his first ever, we'll call them his Boy Scouts. We know there weren't Boy Scouts, but the people who did their training and took their badges on Brownsea Island, one of them got Two Little Savages by Seaton. So certainly Baden-Powell was acknowledging there that was a book to have. So we move on then to the next photograph, which is also to do with Seaton, because in 1910, Baden-Powell went to America and he was invited to speak to the great and the good at the Waldorf Hotel in New York. And everybody was there, all the American pioneers. And in the picture, you see Seaton standing up tall with his glasses. And behind him, I bet our American friends know who that is. That is Daniel. Dear me, I've forgotten his name already. It'll come to me. Daniel Beard and Seaton. And so after this dinner, at the dinner, Seaton introduced Baden-Powell and was setting a little bit of a trap for him, because he was saying, and now I'm going to introduce Baden-Powell, who considers himself to be one of the fathers of scouting. So Baden-Powell stood up, and in front of all the great and the good, and Daniel Beard, who was definitely a great American pioneer scouter, he said, well, I must correct you there, Mr. Seaton, because scouting has many fathers. Mr. Seaton, you may well be one of the fathers of scouting. And Daniel Beard sitting over there, he is definitely another of the fathers of scouting. Me, he said, I am just one of the uncles. So he avoided that trap, and nothing could be said. So after the meal was over, they went across to the nearby YMCA building, and they went up on the roof for this photograph. So Baden-Powell, who was always described as a dapper little man, was miles shorter than these two. So what he did was he sat on a chimney pot. That's what he's sitting on. He's sitting on a chimney pot. So Daniel Beard and Seaton go side by side. In Seaton's later life, he was to complain bitterly about that photograph. He said Baden-Powell manipulated us so that he was the center of attention. He was the figure of importance, and we were just the also-rans. We were just the acolytes. Well, if that's what he felt, I'm not going to say he was wrong. But whatever else we say about Seaton, he was a world pioneer in outdoor conservation. He was and he was a foremost in bringing young people into the outdoors, and he was the greatest exponent of woodcraft. Was he the founder of Scouting? Well, here's a little test that I apply. Right, what is the essence of a scout? You're all shouting and screaming at me that it is the Scout Law and Promise, and you would be correct. So we have the Scout Law and Promise, which includes a promise to God. Seaton was an atheist. Seaton was a great respecter of Red Indian culture, but he wasn't into teaching citizenship, which is the byline of Scouting for Boys, a manual for good citizenship. That was not what Seaton was about. And as Scouting is based on that premise and based on a promise to God, then whatever it was that Seaton invented, which was very, very important, and I'm not going to undermine it at all, very, very important, but it wasn't Scouting. You can say outdoor movement for boys, you can say conservationist, you can say woodcraft, but to be a scout, you have to take, or you did have to take at that time, a promise to God. So, Scouting for Boys gets to be written, and Baden-Powell, his mind is already in overdrive and is planning what's going to happen next. And so, in his little Purda windmill at Wimbledon, he did venture out onto the common, and he found that there were scouts doing scouty things, dressed up in uniform, and he encountered a patrol of scouts under the guise of its scoutmaster, and they were setting themselves up as a demonstration patrol to be able to demonstrate scouting skills to other scout groups. And on Wimbledon Common, there they were, dressed in their white jerseys, in their correct scout uniform, because the only thing that was correct scout uniform in 1908 was the hat, the staff, and the rucksack. There was no mention of shorts. There was no mention of shirt. You could have a shirt any color you like. So they're dressed in correct scout uniform, and look, they've got a belt. So this was the patrol on Wimbledon Common, and they were engaged in a patrol competition with some boys from Hampstead. And Baden-Powell went out and spent the day or the afternoon with these boys in this competition. And the Hampstead Scoutmaster was a great photographer, and he took these photographs of the activities that were going on, and they were turned into these postcards, which became a teaching aid sold at the scout shop for the edification of other scout leaders, so that they could emulate what was going on here. So we're now going to look at some of the activities. So Baden-Powell actually wrote a report of what was going on in Wimbledon Common in the Scout magazine, published weekly, which we'll see a little bit about in a minute. And he said these boys were exemplary in nearly everything they did, but they were a little bit remiss in their axemanship, because they said they attacked the tree and their chopping was all over the place. Well, Ken was, our RSL will tell you the reason for that is they've got the wrong tool for the job. What they've got is a hand axe. That is no good at all. And the other thing, well, it is very good at all if you want to chop kindling, but it's not a lot of good for felling trees. The other thing we would be worried about today, wouldn't we, is are we going to allow people to go around chopping down trees on Wimbledon Common willy-nilly? I don't think so. But the photograph's interesting, isn't it? Because clearly you've got some boys there who are a bit dubious on the right-hand side. One who thinks it's a great laugh. And then you've got a boy on the left-hand side that's going to get past it as fast as he can with his hands in his pocket. But the two boys behind the tree, I think they're potential recruits. So we can move on now then to next slide. Now, I think you saw a similar photograph, not this photograph, but a similar photograph, because this was an activity that happened on Brownsea. And this is the weaving of the mat, which is the mattress that went in the bottom of the tent. So you're a little bit off the ground and it was a bit more comfortable. And again, the boys stand out like a sore thumb because they are wearing these white jerseys. So now we can move to the next one. And the first magic lantern slide. All the photographs were turned into magic lantern slides so they could be shown at village halls to the public and to the boys themselves of what scouting activities look like. So now we go to the next one. And this is a patrol reconnoitering, which is interesting because you perhaps remember from the Brownsea talk, the Baden-Powell did write a book for soldiers called Scouting and Reconnoitering. And here we've got them climbing up the bank. So keeping a low profile. I don't think they'll be seen from the other side, will they? So we can move on. Now this is Colburn Pierce. And Colburn Pierce was the scoutmaster of the Hampstead troop, the first Hampstead troop, which was called the Firsts. He was a very good scoutmaster, and Baden-Powell took to him and said of his patrol that when he joined them for a meal on Wimbledon Common, he said, "The meat was excellently cooked and I enjoyed my kebab. The drill and discipline of the patrols was very smart and good. Fire laying was very good indeed, especially when one considered that it had been raining the previous day and scouts were not allowed to use any other material other than the wood that they found there. But axemanship, they were hitting the tree all over the place with the axe." So things are looking up now in the south of England. We've got a demonstration patrol prepared to go out into the country for fetes, village fetes and the like, and demonstrate scouting skills. Baden-Powell thought that was excellent. Could we have another such patrol in the north of England? And he remembered that after the Brownsea camp, he had been to Chillingham Castle, which was the home of two of the boys at Brownsea, and he was on a shooting party. And he met with his shooting party a regimental friend called Colonel Vaux. Colonel Vaux of the Durham Brewing family. I'm sure you've all heard of Vaux's beer. Well, Colonel Vaux had a youth club in Sunderland. He was a man who tried his best. He was a very benevolent man, and he tried his best to help the community. And so he set up this youth club in Lambton Street, Sunderland, for waifs and strays and street vendors. That was the name of the club. The Sunderland Lambton Street Club for waifs and strays and street vendors. And the street vendors bit is important because Vaux got these young men jobs as selling newspapers, and the money that they got from selling the newspapers went to the families. So these were impoverished families that were being supported by Vaux, who got these people the jobs. And in fact, when he started, he changed his club overnight into being a scout group, and he paid the two youth leaders to become scout leaders, and he paid the scouts to attend the scout meeting, because he realized that if they'd come off the streets to go to the scout meeting, they would be losing income for the family. So he paid for that. So Baden-Powell persuaded him, when he'd started his scout group, Baden-Powell went up to County Durham, and he gave a talk which Colonel Vaux attended, and he persuaded him that he too should start a demonstration patrol. So now we've got the Peewits, Vaux's patrol in Sunderland, and we've got the Kangaroos from Hampstead, and Baden-Powell arranged for them to meet at Colonel Vaux's farm, Grindon Lodge, Sunderland, May 12th, 1908, for a 10-day camp, and that he, Baden-Powell, would be there on one day towards the end of the camp to inspect these boys. And this was recorded in the Scout magazine, and it was also, I discovered, recorded in the Sunderland Echo. So I hot-footed it up to Sunderland, to the Echo archive, and sure enough, I found that there was reference in the Scout magazine version that the camp was attended by a reporter and a photographer. So I found the report in the Sunderland Echo, but I didn't find a photograph. So when I started my website, Scouting Milestones website, which you can still find on the internet, best place to look for it would be in the Scouting Radio website. When I went to the archive, I found the report, Baden-Powell's report on the camp, but I didn't find a photograph. Now, only a year ago, a lady wrote to me who was doing family history, and she had read the web pages and about Colonel Vaux' scout camp at Grindon Lodge in 1908. And she said she wondered whether this photograph that she had here, taken at a camp at Vaux' farm in 1908, whether it could possibly be of any importance. Now, we are looking at here a postcard, because that's what it is on the back. We are looking at a postcard, the only postcard that's known of the first ever Scout camp, because we all know that Brownsea was an experimental camp. So this lady sent me this photograph, and her husband's grandfather is the one in the middle. So that's very, very important. Very, very important photograph. So these two patrols, they met, Baden-Powell attended, there was the reports in the newspaper, and then they went about their business giving displays, which they'd been trained to do, up and down their parts of the country. The one from Hampstead and Wimbledon, that went down as far as Cornwall giving demonstrations. So now we move on to a very significant date in Scout history with the publication of the Scout newspaper weekly, which was a part of the contract with Pearson. In Pearson giving Baden-Powell that large sum of money, the contract was that Pearson got to publish the Scout magazine and Scouting for Boys. So he more than ever got his money back, because Scouting for Boys has never been out to print. So here's the very first edition of Scouting for Boys, and it's got John Hassell was the artist that did the black line drawings on the parts, and here he is. That's the John Hassell sketch there on the Scout magazine. And take note, number 1, volume 1, 18th of April 1908. So now Baden-Powell has got a weekly magazine to publicize his Scout movement, but it's under control of Pearson. So the back page is very, very interesting to read, because it's Baden-Powell commenting on the news that he's had from different Scout troops up and down different parts of the country. And then perhaps inside the magazine, there's half a page here and there given over to some scouting skills. But the rest of it was described by Baden-Powell as being a penny dreadful. He didn't like it at all. There were pictures that were sensationalist, not pictures that were sensationalist, stories that you would find in a comic. There was nothing nasty about the stories. There was nothing wrong with the stories, but they were not to do with scouting. So Baden-Powell didn't really appreciate that. But perhaps Pearson had something going, because he was attracting an audience to scouting. Boys of that age wanted to read adventurous stories. Scouting had barely started, so he weaned them into scouting by this magazine. Not overappreciated by Baden-Powell, but also Pearson's influence is written all over it when I show you the next slide. So here we have, from volume number 1, a voting coupon. Now, it's nothing to do with voting. This is a coupon inside the Scout magazine that's got to be cut out and saved. Because if you save more of these coupons than anybody else, you find out what happens in the next slide. Here we go. A fortnight in General Baden-Powell's camp, the most fascinating holiday ever offered, all for free, 30 boys invited, all expenses paid. And there's voting coupon number 2. So the idea was that you bought the Scout magazine, you cut out the coupon, and you sent the coupons off to the Scout, to the Scout magazine. And the Scout magazine every week would have a running total of who had got the most coupons sold. And then nearing the date when the Scout camp was going to be held, there's no mention of where it's going to be held or when it's going to be held in that diatribe there. But it was going to be held in August. And at the time, Baden-Powell thought it was going to be at Spurn Point. So he doesn't declare where it's going to be. But the boys, the 30 boys who've sold the most coupons are going to go to this camp. Now, it's a bit hard to read, but if you read the voting coupon now, we should have read it on the last one, you'll see that they've got to send these forms to the Scout office in Henrietta Street, London. And Henrietta Street was where Pearson's offices were. And Baden-Powell and Pearson had a contract that Baden-Powell would have an office for scouting in Henrietta Street. And from his diary, which I have transposed, on January the 1st, that contract comes into play, and Pearson gives Baden-Powell a stenographer, which is somebody who I think could take shorthand. And so we have a Scout officer. And Baden-Powell's assistant scoutmaster on Brownsea, his friend, the Boys McLaren, becomes the first secretary of the Scout Association. So we talk all the time about how important Scout history is. And it's plumbed into our brains, isn't it? We're human beings. We desire to know when things started. We know our birthdays, we know other people's birthdays, we know when the first public train ever ran on the rails, we know all these things when they started. So here we've got the world's biggest youth organization. Put your hand up if you know when it started. Well, I don't see too many hands. I know when it started because I read Baden-Powell's diary. On January the 1st, 1908, he says, the contracts have been signed and I take over the use of the Scout office today. And he's got a stenographer and he's got a secretary and it's called the Scout office. So before that time, we had an idea. January the 1st, we've got a Scout office. So we've got an organization, we've got a movement. So that is when Scouting began. But you will not find that written down in any book anywhere except The Dawn of the World Scout Movement. So we can move on. And now, so the competition went on, and eventually the destination was declared. The destination is going to be in Northumberland, close to the Roman wall. And it's going to be on August the 27th to September the 5th. And it says along the bottom there that if you are in the gallant 30, and it kept on using those words, I don't know what was gallant about them. They just sold more tickets than anybody else. But if you were going to be in the gallant 30, not only would you get a free camp, you would get a camera, a Scout camera, to which you are also entitled. We'll present it to you on your arrival in camp. And it doesn't say so there, but they were also given a logbook, a diary. And Baden-Powell was going to take that diary in and check it and look after it and write comments in it at the end of the camp before they were given back to their boys. And so 4 of those diaries exist today. I've read all 4. I'm sure other people have read individual diaries, but I'm pretty certain that nobody has read all 4, because one of them is Baden-Powell's diary itself, and that's in the Boy Scouts of America archive. And one of them is in a museum in Canada, because one of the boys we'll be talking about later, he emigrated to Canada, and his Brownsea diary is in Canada. But by cross-checking the diaries, I've been able to find out a great deal about the camp. So we can move on now. Now this is a postcard that was sent out to one of the boys, and we'll be talking about this boy a lot later, because I'm lucky enough to own this disgraceful looking piece of postcard that survived all these years. But this boy here is, so we have duly received and credited you with 2,417 votes. Now a vote was 1 coupon. So this boy collected 2,417 votes. His name was Jonathan Oakley, and he was in Captain Vaux's troop. And he was the son of a policeman who had 10 children. So he fitted in well with Vaux's idea of supporting the waifs and strays, didn't he? So how does an impoverished family in Sunderland with 10 children get to have a boy who can afford 2,417 magazines, even if they did only cost a penny? Well, Colonel Vaux bought them all, didn't he? That's what he did. He was determined that one of his boys would go to Baden-Powell's camp. And so this is a really significant, lovely thing to have. And we'll be talking more about Jonathan Oakley in a bit. And so in the last issue, right prior to departure to the camp, we see this in the Scout. This is a list of things a boy should be to camp. And I read through this, and I don't know if it says something more about me than anything else, but I read that boys going to camp must take with them a pair of drawers. Now, for those of you who have got a quiet mind and you're not that old, you may not know what a pair of drawers are. A pair of drawers are underpants. And we are told that the boys going to Brownsea should have a pair. So I thought that was quite amusing. So now we're going to move on to the camp itself. And here we see the great man ready for the Brownsea camp. And in his hand, he's got his binoculars, which I've held in my hand. And they are the very binoculars that he was presented with by people in Britain in appreciation of the work that he did at Mafeking, and they were sent to him at Mafeking, and then he went off in South African Constabulary, and he much prized those binoculars. Now, I don't know how good your memory are, but it's a little bit of a test. There is a fundamental difference between this photograph of Baden-Powell taken at Brownsea and the photograph I showed you of Baden-Powell. Now, the photograph here now is fundamentally different from the photograph that I showed you taken at Brownsea. So what's different? The Brownsea photograph had got these long white GSL's ribbons on his shoulder coming down to his elbow. He'd got a Scout staff. He'd got the shirt, which is the shirt he wore as the commanding officer of the South African Constabulary. He'd got his neckerchief. What's different? On Brownsea, what sort of a hat did he have? A fedora collapsible hat. On Brownsea, he's got a Scout hat. Boss of the Plains was the maker. Baden-Powell, be prepared, boss of the Plains. So there he is, our founder. So he had a good staff of people to help him with the Brownsea camp, and he needed it because at the time the Brownsea camp was on, he was the commanding officer of the Northumbrian division of the Territorial Army. And Northumbria went all the way from the Scottish walls down to the Scottish border, all the way down to the Humber, Northumbria. So that's a huge area. And Baden-Powell was the first commander-in-chief of the Territorial Army, which actually started in 1908. And they were having camps at the time, and Baden-Powell had to go and inspect them. So he wasn't able to devote all his time to the Humsoft camp. So he needed a lot of help. And here is a character that helped him. This is Banjo Booth. Now, Banjo Booth came from Yorkshire. Well, you can see that in his face. What a great guy he is. And he was always with his banjo. And the lads loved him because he was always singing and playing his banjo. He had a great time at Humsoft. But like so many other good men, come 1914, after went to war, and he was killed in 1916. But that is Banjo Booth. And I had contact with his family. When he died on the Somme, his banjo was sent back to the family. But he was a great guy. So the next photograph you should recognize because we used it in the last presentation. And this is Donald. And Donald is there in that photograph taken at Brownsea. And he was at Humsoft because he wasn't an orphan. His father had died, hadn't he? And Baden-Powell was looking after him. And he came to the Humsoft camp just like he came to the Brownsea one. And in fact, he had a great part in it because he managed to get himself lost. And that was a great thing. But the leader of the World Scout organization loses his own grandson at camp. Can you imagine what hey the newspapers would have made out of that? And started to search for him, and the sky started to blacken, and it started to pour down with rain, and it got darker and darker. Baden-Powell was in a bit of a panic. He must have been. And so he sent out everybody to look. And these are recorded. What happened next is recorded in a song that was written by Victor Bridges, who was another helper at Humsoft, who was a novelist. And he wrote this song, which I'm not going to sing because I don't know the tune. So you'd be grateful for that. But he says, and 3 scoutmasters with their troop in scout formation went, with lantern poles and tracking irons, and searched the spacious tent. You recollect how all their toil, aborted, proved in vain, and how we wandered through the mud, mid the pelting rain. At last, BP himself declared he would explore that mighty cavernous dome, where Donald did his nightly store. And prodding fiercely in the dark, he struck some muddy boots. Imbaboo, zing-a-zang, boom, boom, gonyama, we are scoots. That was Victor Bridges' recollection of this terrible moment when they thought that they'd lost Donald. So, unbeknown to all the scouts who were toiling away, trying to get these blessed coupons to get themselves a place at Brownsea, a bit of democracy was not going on, in that Baden-Powell decided that he would invite some of the previous boys at Brownsea. Well, you can understand that. He'd had people at Brownsea who'd been trained, who were patrol leaders, and there'd be a guiding hand. So he let some of these people come to help him at Humsoft. So you've got the gallant 30, 2 of whom, for some reason, didn't show up. In their place, 2 more boys were selected, and they were from the 2 demonstration patrols. So the gallant 30 was really gallant 28, plus 2 people who went because they were in the demonstration patrols, and we'll see more of those later. And then we've got the select 6, and one of the select 6 is Donald, and another one is George Rodney. Now, George Rodney was one of the 4 Rodneys that we had at the Brownsea camp. He was from the family that caused the consternation in getting the numbers wrong, you recall. He is here doing the loom making at Brownsea. He's got his Brownsea badge on there, look. But he was also a patrol leader at Humsoft, and he went away, grew up as men do, emigrated to Canada, and he became the Director General of Saskatchewan County, Canada, where he was and his wife were in charge of scouting and guiding in Canada. So he was one of the 6. Now, Humphrey Noble, there were 2 Noble brothers at Brownsea. Humphrey Noble wasn't a patrol leader on Brownsea, but his brother was. But Humphrey came to the Brownsea camp, and Baden-Powell, after the Brownsea camp, had gone to stay at the stately home where he lived in Northumberland, Chillingham Castle, and did some shooting. And that's where he met Colonel Wilkes, you perhaps recall. Well, here we've got we haven't got a photograph of Humphrey Noble, but Humphrey Noble, son of Saxton Noble, and the greatest scoutmaster in the world, didn't balance his books at Brownsea. Brownsea was in deficit, and Sir Saxton Noble bailed Baden-Powell out and paid the deficit, as well he could afford to do, because Sir Saxton Noble was the partner of Armstrong, Lord Armstrong of Cragside, who owned the Elsick Iron Works, making everything, including battleships, went on to make Armstrong Whitworth aeroplanes, locomotives, the richest man in the entire company. And Noble, Saxton Noble, was his partner. So I think he could afford to bail Baden-Powell out. And his son, Humphrey Noble, was one of the select 6. And there were 4 others, but we haven't got time to go into them all. But they were exhorted, all the boys at Brownsea were exhorted to go away from the camp and to start their own scout groups. And most of them did. Now, here is a boy who was in the gallant 6, the select 6, who doesn't fit the pattern. He wasn't a friend of Baden-Powell, and he wasn't one of the gallant 30. He wasn't a scout. What's going on? Here's his picture. It's not a very good photograph because it's taken from a postcard. And on the postcard, which you'll see later, is about 1/8 of an inch tall. So this enlargement is really quite good considering the size. You'll see the boy standing behind him is from the demonstration patrol, isn't he? You can tell that, can't you? Because he's wearing the white pullover. But the boy in front of him has got a bugle, and his name is John Cattermole. And John Cattermole was the only boy at the camp that actually came from Northumberland. In fact, he came from Humsholt. He was from Humsholt. He wasn't a scout. He was a member of the Boys Brigade. So why did Baden-Powell want him? He wanted him because he was a Boys Brigade bugler. And there he is blowing his bugle. Now, I can see that Ken and Brian are laughing their socks off because when I say bugle, I say it with a Fenland accent. It's a bugle and it's Tuesday. So John Cattermole from Humsholt was chosen to go to the camp because he was a bugler. And after the camp, he grew up to be a man and he emigrated to Australia. And in 1957, we have the 100th anniversary of the Brownsea camp. We have the Jubilee Jamboree, celebrations all over the country. And in Northumberland, there was a big camp at Dilston Hall, about 2 or 3 miles away from Humsholt. And they all trekked up to the monument that was built at the Humsholt camp. And John Cattermole, all the way from Australia, sent the bugle, the very bugle that he'd played at Humsholt, to be played at that jamboree. And it was. And Humphrey Noble, who we just talked about, he was there at the camp, as was the chief scout of the day. And what happened to the bugle? It was going to be a competition. It was going to be something that the boys could win as a trophy. Nobody's ever seen it since, I'm afraid. We'd love to find it. So that is John Cattermole, one who doesn't fit in. Now here we have the very boy that we're talking about, Jonathan Oakley. On the left-hand side there, look, you can see he's got his second-class metal badge on his arm sleeves. This is the troop, Colonel Vaux's troop in Sunderland, and they'd obviously won a competition. And when I first saw this picture, I thought it must be quite late on in scouting because there's all these plaques for people who have won the competition. But that's not the case because in those days, the plaques were all there waiting for people to win it. So this is 1908, and this is Jonathan Oakley. How I came to have that photograph, because I do have that photograph, we will be talking about in a bit. So that is another one of the gallant 30. Now, most people don't know very much at all about the Brownsea boys, but the Brownsea boys are 100 times better known than the Humsholt boys. The Humsholt boys never received any accolades or any recognition. They were never invited back. The Brownsea boys, some of them were still alive and went to the Jubilee Jamboree in 1957. They went to reunions at Baden-Powell's house at PAX 2. The Humsholt boys, you never hear of them again. So that's why these diaries and the work that I've done, I think is so important because we're recalling people that would be lost to scouting. So now we move on to the next slide. And this is the cameras that we referred to earlier that Baden-Powell gave to the gallant 30. And they're called scout cameras. And this is the catalogue of Gamages of Holborn, who in 1908 held a whole floor of Gamages was given over to scouting, and scouts actually camped in the exhibition and were doing scouty things when the customers came into the shop. They could walk around the scout camp Gamages and they could buy scout equipment. And a leader came over from all the way from Germany, Captain Leon, who founded the scout movement because Baden-Powell allowed him to take back scouting for boys, all at the Gamages exhibition. Now, I don't know which one of these cameras it was, but I'm guessing it was the cheapest one. The gallant 30 got the camera and the next 50 down, because there were hundreds of people collecting these coupons. Week after week in the Scout, there were lists of them going down sometimes to 500 people being encouraged to sell these coupons. But they all got the camera. And now we're going on to the next photograph, which was taken on one of these cameras by a Charles Hogg. And this is his photograph of Baden-Powell at Humsoft, taken on a Scout camera, given to him by Baden-Powell. What a find is that? Who cares that it's out of focus? Right, so the diaries that were found that I've read, Baden-Powell's diary, the one in the Canadian Scout Archives, and Lawrence Humphrey's diary, and a Liverpool lad, Henry Thompson's diary. So we can move on now and see this car, which is what we made our calling card out of. So you've got two patrols there. You can see there's the Curlews, and I think this one, I can't quite make it out. It's probably Bulls, I would think. We've got Baden-Powell sitting in the middle, one of the helpers, and all the boys, all dressed in immaculate Scout uniform. I think, I do not know, I surmise that they were all given this uniform when they went to camp, because they're all immaculate and they're all wearing exactly the same thing. And the purpose of the camp was to be a demonstration camp to inform Scouts all over the country as to how Scouting was going to progress. So it would be important to Baden-Powell to have them all looking the same. Now, behind him is Baden-Powell's car. Now, this car was a British Army staff officer's car, which the public could buy. Baden-Powell brought it to the camp and he had it converted into a motor caravan. Now, how do we know this? Let's go on to the next slide. There is his bill of sale. When he came to sell the car, the very bill of sale for the 18 horsepower Thornycroft touring car, staff officer pattern, and it's got lying down accommodation, drawers and sliding table and lamps with hood, spares, etc. That's got to be one of the world's first motor caravans in 1908. And Baden-Powell had used it to go around the country and he slept in it. I don't think he slept in it at Humsoft. I've got some evidence of that in a minute, but the car was there. And he used the car to go out to inspect his TA in nearby camps. And there was a bit of a disastrous accident because he took with him his little dog, Taffy. So to stop Taffy from wandering off, he tied him to the rear bumper of the car. And no doubt in a tearing hurry with his mind on other things like I have all the time, he got in the car and poor Taffy was dragged to his death. Which Scout law is it that says a Scout is kind to animals? What a shame. So we shouldn't laugh, should we? Because it could happen to any of us, especially when we get a little bit older. So then we move on there.
Somebody would cut out.
And here we've got a bit of a map that I drew for my book, because I'm a geographer and it's important to me to be able to visualize what's going on. So at the bottom, we've got a railway line, which is the main line from Newcastle across the country to Carlisle. And we've got on that railway line that follows the line of the River Tyne, you can see Fourstone Station. So the boys could go to the camp on the train, no matter where they came from in the country. And you'll see that it's not far from Hexham, bottom right-hand side. And the boys were there in camp for 2 Sundays. And for 2 Sundays, they went to Hexham Abbey and took part in the service. And there, if you go up from the right, from the road that goes to the right, from Fourstone, you'll see Walwick Grange. Well, that was the nobles, another noble stately home, which Baden-Powell had stayed in. So that's one of the reasons why he chose this place to camp, because the nobles had given the land for the TA to have their exercises, and Baden-Powell had stayed there. Right next door to Chester's, a Roman fort. Now, if you go back to Fourstone Station and go due north, you'll see X marks the spot. That is the campsite. Okay, and it's just south of the Roman wall, which goes round to Chester's. Now, all these places you will see, Chester's, which you can go and visit today, a Roman camp on the wall, Houghton Castle, supposed to be one of the most haunted castles in the country, Chipchase Castle, all places that Baden-Powell took his scouts. And he took them on the train to the Elswick Works, owned by the said Lord Armstrong with his partner Noble. They actually went to the Elswick Works to see armaments being manufactured. But right up to the top, as far north as you can get on the map, you see Houtsey near the village of Wark. And Baden-Powell walked his boys from the camp, quite a good height, up to Houtsey, because that was the home of Abel Chapman, who was a famous Victorian big game hunter and naturalist. Now, today, that seems to be a contradiction in terms, but how could it be? But he was both. He was a big game hunter and a noted naturalist, and he is famed for conserving the European lynx, which was being hunted to extinction. He set up the first national park in South Africa, which became the Kruger National Park, and Baden-Powell had met him on safari at Nakura in Africa, where they were both on different safaris at different times. Now, I've been on safari to Lake Nakura, but I didn't meet Baden-Powell, and I didn't meet Abel Chapman. Abel Chapman wrote a lot of books, but he also was a big game hunter, and he put all his specimen heads on the walls around his house, and Baden-Powell took the boys so that they could see these specimens. Well, these specimens are now in a museum in Newcastle, and they're rather cleverly, because it's not PC to have stuffed animals now. So what they've done in this museum in Newcastle, they've built a huge Noah's Ark, and they've got all these animals' heads coming out the portholes in the Noah's Ark. So this is what the lads were doing at Humshoff. And there we've got the Roman wall I pointed out to you, and on the Roman wall, there's a cave, King Arthur's Cave. And now you'll know from my talk on Rovering that Baden-Powell was over the moon with the legends of the Knights of the Round Table, and that was one of the stories that he told his boys at the campfire. So that's the map. So now we can move on to see activities. This is a map from one of the boys' diaries, and you can see there that there's triangular shaped things. Those triangular shaped things, I think, no evidence, but I think they're bell tents. You see the huge marquee, which you'll see a picture of at the moment. You see the flag and the store, which is a bell tent, and then Donald, bottom left, has got the cavernous dome. So that square tent is not a bell tent, and it's right beside the road that runs up from Forston, which became part of a famous walk that you'll hear about in a minute. So that's a map out of the diary of one of the boys. He's got owls and ravens, wolves, curlews, kangaroos, and bulls at Humshoff. 36 boys in total, 6 to a patrol. Okay, so we can move on now to one of a series of photographs that was taken at the camp, that was made into sets of postcards and sets of magic lanterns slides, so that it could publicize scouting and show other people what it's all about. And here we have the same flag that was flown over Brownsea, which was the same flag that flew over Mafeking, which was the same flag that a Thane rover paid a lot of money to have stabilized so that you can see it next time you go to Gilwell Park. So here's all the boys in their horseshoe, all 36 of them. Baden-Powell standing to the right with his big long Group Scout leader's ribbons hanging down his shoulders, huge marquee in the background. But can you see the two boys from the demonstration patrol? On the right-hand side in their white pullovers, and there standing is John Cattermole. You can see how it was enlarged. John Cattermole is just standing behind the diagonal line, white line coming down from the flag. So, and you see at the bottom of the postcard, it was publicized as not being a scout camp. Well, it is Boy Scouts at Lieutenant General Baden-Powell's holiday camp. So we can move on to the next one. And this is Curlew's patrol, because we see the patrol flag with curlews on. We can see that the boys have got water camps. We're looking at the boy on the right-hand side. He is wearing a belt, and you're going to say that's not a scout belt, but those of you who are collectors will know very well that it is. That is the Gamages scout belt of 1908, and it is rectangular. So all the boys have got Gamages scout belts. They've all got neckerchiefs, whereas in scouting for boys, you could wear a tie or a neckerchief, and they've all got the hats. And I think they were presented with those. Okay, so we can go on from there. And those self-same watering cans, Baden-Powell's taught them a little bit about pioneering. Look, they've got tripods, and they've made a trestles to suspend the watering cans to warm the water over the ashes of the campfire. So not a very big picture, but it is interesting, I think, in that it shows something that they were doing at the camp. So we move on. And here we have got something that Baden-Powell took out of his tin ammunition box to include it in scouting for boys. Stories of Zulus. He was besotted with Zulus because he thought that the way they brought their young men up to manhood was a really good thing, and there's lots of stories about that. And not surprisingly, he took from their culture an African chant. Joyce is in the name of Ingonyama chorus, and scouts in 1908 were taught this chorus, and whilst they were singing it, they performed a dance, and two boys would leap into the middle of the circle and they would mime the actions of animals. Now, it's very fortunate that we have with us two people from Darkest West Pontefract who are going to perform for us in their inimitable style, the Ingonyama chorus.
Ingonyama, Gonyama, Invubu, Yabo, Yabo, Invubu. Ingonyama, Gonyama, Invubu, Yabo, Yabo, Invubu.
Right, now it's your turn. We're all going to join in. Off we go.
Ingonyama, Gonyama, Gonyama, Invubu, Yabo, Yabo, Invubu.
Now what?
Ingonyama, Gonyama, Invubu, Yabo, Yabo, Invubu.
Now then, you've learned a foreign language. You've learned to sing one of the main songs of scouting, which the great and good at the top of scouting in the 1940s and 50s decided was too undignified for scouts to sing. Can you believe that? So there it is on the postcard that the Magic Lantern side was painted from. You see the boys drag their left foot behind them for 4 slides, and they're holding the scout staff up with their right hand. Look at the expression on those boys' face. Who can believe that these boys were not having the greatest time around the campfire? So that is the Ingonyama chorus, and you have just witnessed something really great. If you look at the middle boy with his back to us, and then go to the right, 2 boys, you will see that the second boy is wearing a kilt. There were 4 boys from Scotland. There was 1 boy from London, and he wasn't an impoverished lad at all, because he lived at Hyde Park Corner, which is one of the most affluent addresses where Baden-Powell himself lived. Okay, so now we move on. And back to the Magic Lantern slide. Now, this is one of the activities that they did that I found quite surprising. This is Boy Scouts, and again, we've got a boy in one of the demonstration patrols in the middle and another boy to the left from the demonstration patrol. What they're doing is they're climbing a stone wall. Now, when I learnt my country code, when I was in the Cubs, climbing walls was definitely verboten, but here they are climbing a stone wall. So I thought it was a bit of good fun. So now we can move on. And now we are at the campfire at not at Brownsea, at Humshoff. And the campfire at Brownsea was joined by Sir Percy Everett, another one person working for Pearson. And he again joined in this campfire at Humshoff. But by this time, he'd become Deputy Chief Scout. And here the boys are being regaled by Baden-Powell, just as they were at Brownsea. And they're hearing stories of Zulus and Swahilis, Knights of the Bushido, and they are being mesmerized. And they're being inoculated, not indoctrinated, they're being inoculated with an enthusiasm of scouting that will make them go home and spread the word. And here is the much better photographic evidence of the campfire. Now, if you go to the campsite, you can walk along that wall, and that's going to take you up to the monument that was built later, which we'll see in a minute. But there's the great man. And here, yeah, we can move on, Ian. And here is one of the proudest possessions in my scouting collection, which was sent to me by a man who had read my website about Humshoff, and he'd got several artifacts. You've seen a couple of them already. The photograph of Jonathan and his postcard saying how many votes he'd got. And this was after the camp. And this is Baden-Powell's letter home to his parents to tell them just what a good lad he was. He would have sent the same letter, of course, to everybody. But unfortunately, the letter heading is missing. And unfortunately, what a terrible thing to happen. Half of the signature has gone. So as a collector, I was a bit concerned about that and how sad that would be. And then the gentleman that sent me those artifacts for me to take care of wrote me a letter, and this is what he said in the letter. He said, in 1912, Jonathan joined the Royal Army Medical Corps and went to France in 1914. Perhaps fortunately, he was captured in 1915 and sent to a prisoner of war camp in Germany, where he escaped and made his way back to England. Having escaped from one hellhole, he was sent to the ill-fated hellhole of Gallipoli in 1916, which he also survived, to be sent to East Africa, where he was again captured. When the war ended, Oakley joined the Merchant Navy and worked in South Africa and in Canada, where he met his wife, Anne. During the Second World War, Jonathan was again serving his country in one of the highest area of mortality on the Russian convoys, and he was sunk 3 times. And his grandson said his proudest possessions were the artifacts that he had relating to the Humshoff camp, which he kept in his wallet next to his heart every day of his life. So this letter survived the First World War. It survived 2 prisoners of war camps, 2 escapes, and 2 sinkings in the Atlantic. So if you were to offer me a mint conditioned letter with Baden-Powell's signature on in perfect order, in exchange for this, I'd just say, on your bike, this letter for me says it all. Well, you've been a very good audience, and I thank you very much. We're near the end of our presentation. We're just coming up to modern day times, and we can see the cairn that was built at Humshoff. 6 chief scouts have visited this cairn. On the Look Wide walk that goes up from Humshoff station, and there carved into the living rock is Look Wide, the word look wide. And you can look wide. You can look all the way across Northumberland, and up north you can look to the Scottish border, but not if you go today, because if you went today, you would see trees, and some more trees. You cannot look wide. And now later on, we're in 1938, Sir Percy Everett, Baden-Powell's right hand, who was Deputy Chief Scout, who was at the campfire on Brownsea, who was at the campfire at Humsoft, has come to meet the train cruisers on the 4 different train cruises that went around England in the 1930s. No time to tell you about them now, read the book. So Sir Percy Everett is there pointing out the Look Wide, and these boys are on the train cruise, and behind is the monument which the last Chief Scout visited not long ago. So I think there might even be 7 plaques now. I don't know. And here is an anniversary badge from the 90 years of Humsoft in the year 1988. And then the next slide shows this is 100 years of Humsoft, and this is a certificate for the walk that goes from the railway station up to the monument, which you'll perhaps hear a little bit about in a minute. A great scouter called Louis helped one of our number, Dave Mowbray, who is here, to set up this walk, which you can do today, and the badge for it is there on the left-hand side. I don't know if our Rover Scout, Thane Rover, is in the audience, because I can't see all the audience, but just below Baden-Powell's picture is a badge devised by one of our rovers, Joppy, who comes from Finland, and every year he meets at the monument because Humsoft is his second home. He brought his younger son there all the way from Finland. And now below is a Jamboree badge from 2008, when the Baden-Powell Scout Association had a Jamboree very close to the original camp at Humsoft, which I was invited to attend. Scout Association didn't do anything. Humsoft was not important. They did a great deal about Brownsea in 2007, but they didn't even have a badge for Humsoft in 2008, except the Scout District did. The Scout District that Humsoft's in did have a Scout badge, and there it is. That thing in the middle is the stone cairn, and there's 2 plaques on that cairn and 2 trees. But they got one thing wrong, one thing that you will never get wrong in your life again, and that is that they say Humsoft, world's first Scout camp, 1908. You know that Humsoft was not the first Scout camp in 1908. May 1908, Colonel Vaux, Grindon Lodge, 2 demonstration patrols, and Baden-Powell. That was the world's first Scout camp. So there we have it. And now, if you want to read any more, there's the book that you need. You've been a great audience, and thank you very much.
With me. There we go.
There we are.
All right, we'll pass the focus over to young David Mowbray, who's going to say a few words.
Do I unmute myself?
You're all unmuted, David. All ready to go.
Well, Colin, you never fail to surprise anyone. That was a terrific talk, absolutely terrific. There were 1 or 2 little things which I picked up on, and I think the basic difference between the camps, and there's no doubting that BP had a flood of camps before the Humsoft camp. In fact, we had them in Northumberland itself. He was at a place called Erston, which is at Whitley Bay. He was up at Whitley, at Berwick upon Tweed. And so there's no doubt he did a number of camps up and down the country promoting scouting. I think the basic difference is that the Humsoft camp was the one which was billed as being led by the founder, not he was just in and out on a visit. I hate to see it, but when the lads did the Gam Yama chorus there, I actually did that dance in my wood badge training about 1955, 56. And even then, it was classed as old fashioned. But it's part of the wood badge training and the cub course, and we had to do it. You mentioned the BP walk and Louis Robdrup. Every single one of us in scouting, if we're warranted, we've got something to offer the youngsters in our charge. It could be nutting, it could be backwoods cooking, it could be gang show. But in Louis Robdrup's thing, his biggest gift to scouting was the Baden-Powell walk. I've been going up to the cairn since I was a kid, and it's dead easy to walk up a road, cross a field, look at a monument, and come away again. But Louis saw something that none of us saw, and he was determined to make something more of the walk than just a hike up and look at a bit of stone. He turned to Northumberland Scouts. They weren't interested. They turned to the Hadrian district, which was part of where the Humshof is. They weren't interested. Turned to Newcastle, where we all were part of Newcastle Gang Show, and that's what brought us together. They weren't accepted. And at that time, I was the ACC International. And Louis turned to me and said, what can we do? And I turned to a lady called Val Phillips, she succeeded me as ACC Cubs, and then she went to be ACC Venture Scouts Fellowship for Northumberland. And I turned to Val and said, can we help Louis here? And it was Val Phillips who pushed things and said, right, if you want to do the walk, we'll put it under the banner of the fellowship. And that's how it all started. And to this day, part of the mandate of the Newcastle Gang Show Scout Fellowship, or active support unit as we are, that is our mandate, is to keep alive the memory of Baden-Powell, and we still do the BP walk whenever it is needed. We've had over nearly 25,000 visitors that we know about, and little things come to light as you do it. I still believe that every youngster loves to learn about the past. And if you can sell it to the story of Baden-Powell, then the kids will pick it up, and it forces the leaders to ask questions themselves.
Well, here.
I don't want to make a speech after a speech, so I'll be as brief as I can. But first of all, somebody mentioned it was the pronunciation. It's Humshof. And Baden-Powell didn't make many mistakes in life, but Humshof camp is 2 or 3 miles away from Humshof. And if you can put your mind back to the map that you showed, Colin, the train, as you rightly said, the boys came from all parts of the UK to Newcastle, changed to the train from Newcastle, which went to Hexham, but it stopped at a station called 4 stones. You had 4 stones on the map. But never the Humshoff. The Humshoff's another 2 or 3 miles up the road. And we did a bit of research. He was been going to the George at Chollerford since 1903, and his capacity as the commandant for the territorials. The station where the kids got off was 4 stones. And the one common link when he stayed at the George at Chollerford, that was also called under the banner of Humshoff. And it boils down to the telephone exchange was at Humshoff. And so no matter where in that area you stayed, that the telephone exchange was the same telephone exchange.
Well,
I don't want to go on again any further, but the Colonel Vaux. Colonel Vaux, BP served in India with the Colonel Vaux's son, and he, through the son, he met the Colonel, obviously, and he met the Colonel's daughter, and for a long time he was chasing the daughter, and that was one of the main links between BP and the Vaux family.
Oh,
very good, Dave.
I
think we better
Yes, I'll
go
close
on to.
there, but say thank you very much indeed, Colin. Thank you very much indeed for a very interesting and attractive talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very, very much. Now, we've gone on a bit, but we've always got time for questions. And I can see some really good friends from Northumberland there on my screen. It's very nice to hear Northumberland accent from Dave. I'm hoping you've got 1 or 2 questions to put to me and test me out.
I think the best thing is to raise a hand if there's any questions. Nothing actually on chat that I can see. So if anybody wants to raise a hand to ask any questions. If not, we'll pass over to Ken to close the meeting. Nothing saying, Colin, so.
No, that's right. Well, our RSL will close the meeting in the way he always closes every Rover meeting that we have. Where's he gone? Are you there, Ken?
yes. True uncover praise. Lord, in this evening hour, we pray for strength to live out our best each day. Draw near to us, we disperse tonight, even to our homes, and may our guardian angel be with us overnight. Amen.
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 Crew dismiss.
Good night.
Good night, chaps.
Good scouting, everybody.
Good scouting, everybody.
Good scouting.
Bye-bye. There we are.
I don't know where I got that from.
Are we?
Yeah, we're ready. We're all finished. So have we lost our audiences?
Well, if we're staying on a bit, Colin, have we lost the audience?
Well, I can't see them, so I guess we have. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
There's a few left yet, gentlemen.
I can
yeah.
see. Well, they're fine.
I think it's only the gang, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we've got a little bit of information, Ian.
Yeah.
I had. Oh, are we okay then? Can we
Yep,
talk?
okay, you carry on, Kent. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, basically, what it is, I had Nathan on from Gilwell, and is what he's wanting us to do is that he knows obviously that over the last 2-year period there's been very little done down at Gilwell, and there's one or two fairly dire projects that want finishing off, which obviously one's the Leopard Gate. We know he knows we've got the Maori Arch and the now the bridge that we built over the bomb hole. It's in badly need of some repairs, and so basically what he's saying is that once this this lockdown thing, we can get down there. What he's prepared to do is he'll let us have one of the lodges, and what we can do is go down as rovers and do some work down there, which we know that we've got quite a bit to do, but there's a fair bit of the gates haven't been painted, and there's various things that's not being done that we can help out with to prepare it for when they start camping again. So really what he's wanting is he wanted some dates from us. So if we can sort out some dates between the various crews, then we can get down there and start doing a little bit of service work.
Good.
So it's go away, think a bit about what what dates you've got available, and then we can proceed.
Yes.
But it's what they're doing is, according to form, they've closed all the top offices, and they are working in the lower offices, and that's what's happening. So
Right.
but it just gives you something to think about.
Have everybody unmuted.
Well, before we depart, I'd just like to place on record my thanks. I should have really done it when the people were watching, but Chris, unfortunately, I think I've seen Chris here now.
He's not here at the minute, but he was.
He's back, but Chris had to go, and so the whole burden of running tonight's show fell on Ian, and I think he coped absolutely brilliantly. But thank you indeed, to John and to everybody that's helped, because it's all these things. I might be sitting here at the front spouting out, which is what I do, but I could not do it without. This is a Thane Rover Crew team effort, and I'm very grateful for all the help and support that I get. That's great. So I've just got one last thing to ask. Greg will come in after me. I want to ask Gary and Ken what time the walk starts tomorrow. What time do we have to be at yours tomorrow, Ken?
You all unmuted.
10 o'clock
Hello,
here.
Adam.
10 o'clock here. You want me to pick you up, Colin?
Hang on, let's make
Yeah, that'd be great if you wouldn't mind. Yes.
I'll pick you up.
Okay, so I've sorted out my walk. Greg, you wanted to say?
Please, yeah, it's an update. I contacted Matt Hyde and I pitched the Back to Basics Gilwell reunion, and he responded with saying that he had a whole host of good excuses and saying that it just can't happen. So there's definitely not a Gilwell reunion this year.
Oh, well, we know where we are, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what he's saying, but there's nothing stopping us going as the Thane Rover Crew and doing some work that weekend at Gilwell.
Oh, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Sounds like a good weekend to do it then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
It could be that could be quite possible.
Yeah. I mean,
it could be a weekend that we go down and do some work down there.
Yeah.
Well done, Colin.
Mm.
No.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. It's been I don't know what the time is now.
Well done, Ian.
Sorry, what?
Well done, but likely, lads.
Yes.
I'll be honest, I'm glad it's over.
Hello. I've got I found this sample of colours. I don't know if you've got this from MBC, Neckerchief Makers.
All right.
So there's a gold colour and a scout green, which would probably suit our purposes very well.
Well, have you matched the gold to the gold of the neckerchief?
MBC. Where are they based, Peter?
Centenary gold, it says. There, look, centenary gold there.
Have you got a gold, a Thane Rover Crew neckerchief, Peter?
No,
yet?
he hasn't.
I haven't got
No.
one. I haven't got one. No.
No,
Right.
listen,
Yeah.
Peter,
Yeah.
can you send that colour chart
Yes.
to Chris Arthur?
Right.
Because it's Jackie Trott that's going to buy the relevant ribbon and material, and she's going to do just make them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she obviously that, but I sent her one of my neckers down there as a pattern.
Yeah.
But that's what she's going to do. But she was going to go to an haberdasher's and see if she couldn't get the relevant coloured ribbon, you know, to actually put on the neckers that we've got, because they are the wrong colour. It's the green's right, but that's the colour chart for a neckerchief maker, isn't it?
The colour chart Peter's got is from persons that make.
Yeah, there's only one way of testing the gold, and just put it alongside the neckerchief that we've got that's got the right colour on. Otherwise, all our existing neckers will be the wrong colour, won't they?
No.
Yeah,
Everybody will need one.
Oh, don't
yeah.
go there. Don't go.
No, you know, it's
turning
becoming
into a marathon.
it's becoming a marathon.
getting a bit
To be
silly,
honest,
isn't it?
it's
The Rover Crew's been in existence over 10 years, and it's been ongoing ever since.
Right.
well,
Ever
it-
since we
that's,
started.
yeah, I've got to be honest.
think
It,
it is
it
getting
really
a
is
bit
getting boot silly.
In fact, I
It
think
is.
we should change his colours.
Yeah, why didn't we have an all black necker? It'd be easy peasy.
Look, let's just get this problem solved, this neckerchief, and that's it. Then it's done.
You've asked.
I've asked Jackie to sort it out, so let's leave it at that. For goodness' sake,
10 o'clock tomorrow.
I'm ready to hang myself.
We could have bow ties instead. Bow ties.
Yeah, I've got nice red pants and a black one.
Very snazzy.
Right.
Oh, it must be dinner time. I think I could feel.
I think I'm getting.
Yeah. Well, I think you deserve a double helping, Ian.
No. It wasn't as bad as I was expecting, to be honest. It was. I think really we need to thank John as well, because he
Yes, we
stepped
do,
in at the last minute
exactly, we do.
to.
Can I just say this before you all
How
go?
many did you
Before
get?
you all go,
Right.
because Dave Mowbray made me feel very, very old. Because
Yeah, I won't say it.
You are.
because in my scout troop we used to do it in Gonyama chorus, but we used to do it as a round and dance around campfire.
Have you still got your draggy leg, Ken?
No, you're making me no, we didn't do that. I
No,
must
no.
confess, but we used to do it as a round.
But if he did it now, he would have a draggy leg.
Yeah.
I've always dragged my leg.
How many viewers did we get?
How many viewers did we get, Colin?
I think
I have no idea.
I-
Technology is beyond me. I
Is it-
don't know.
was
I'm
on
just
for-
doing the talking.
I think it'll be on. Hang on a minute. I'll tell you what. We're still doing the recording now. I forgot to turn it off.